I am a professional Banbanner. That is not a title that I am proud of, but it is a blatant fact about myself. The fastest I've ever beaten Garten of Banban 1 is 3 minutes and 15 seconds, yet I have over 45 hours in it. If you've been around here, you know this. I am the Banban person to go to. You can make fun of me for that, I won't blame you, but you keep watching, so the joke is on you. With all of the experience and knowledge I have on this series, with the tumultuous relationship I have had with this series, I decided we should rank the games just for the fun of it. I feel the need to quickly say this at the start for the sake of myself and others. This is purely my opinion and it is strictly analysis of the games and not the developers behind them or any other associated creators. I am not here to bully or harass any people, and I don't think you should either. I'm just here to talk about some silly games that I have purchased and played at extreme lengths. We love to rank stuff on this channel, and we have 7 entries in the series at this point, so with Banban 8 and a brand new Euphoric Brothers game on the way, let's reanalyze, reassess, and rank every Garten of Banban game from worst to best. Bird up. The sheer amount at which I cannot stand Garten of Banban 6 can never truly be understated. When a new Banban game comes out, there's always videos with a title along the lines of, "It's getting better," or "They're actually improving." And although I don't always or even usually agree with that, this was the instance where I found that the most unacceptable, and blatantly lying. Garten of Banban 6 managed to repeat every mistake that past games made, and to a significantly worse degree. The drone in this game is beyond horrific. It has a new mechanic where it's used as a light source because in this environment staying in the dark for too long results in your death, and dragging this thing around makes the game so slow, and it's so frustrating because we all know how unresponsive it is. The drone puzzles are also unreal, with how ridiculous the placements of the buttons are, and how pointless they feel structurally. Speaking of puzzles, this game sure does have them, to just fill time. I sure do love puzzles based around colors, where the colors look almost exactly the same, and the puzzle has to be repeated a freakish amount of times. I love pushing around statues of the titular Banban, also for a freakish amount of time. Banban puzzles have always been bad, but they never last this stupidly long. I will say though, before I say everything else in this game is terrible, this one sit and survive style sequence with Bittergiggle is genuinely good. This is a fun sequence. If only it wasn't just a 5-minute sequence in an hour-and-a-half long game. The boss fight is poorly made and very lame, and of course features a popular joke in the community that spawned from someone that they solely created lots of bad blood with. And this is before the redemption arc in the following game, so points are still removed for how annoying and gross this was. Garten of Banban introduces one of its worst characters of all time in this game with the villainous Sir Dadadoo. This is one of their shittiest designs, it features arguably their worst voice actor, and the name is so embarrassing it legitimately hurts me to say and hear. And on top of all of that, this game is just so boring. There's so much dialogue that is terribly written and recorded. There's so much padding in its terrible sequences, and it's just so structurally empty. Garten of Banban 6 isn't that much worse functionally or technically than the next few we will talk about, but the sheer totality of bad stuff far exceeds any of the entries that came before or after, making it handedly the worst in my book.
Jumbo Josh on the mic, bro.
I love Garten of Banban 1. I love it so much. With that being said, this game is so laughably bad. This game doesn't deserve as much hate as the other games in my opinion, purely because it is free. The game was clowned on at launch, that's how we got here obviously, but we were way more playful with this one because it was pretty harmless given that it cost nothing to play. Speaking of nothing, yeah, that's how I would describe this game. This game is just so unbelievably nothing. There's no puzzles, there isn't really any story, there aren't really mechanics, there's the drone gimmick of course. It is slow and boring, as we all know. There is actually one thing people have given this game credit for, and I actually am inclined to agree. When Opila Bird first approaches you after getting across the big, stupid gap, it is actually pretty cool the way she behaves like a curious wild animal. There's a sense of intrigue in her movements, and a sense of hesitation in how slow she approaches. I kinda like that. Everything else is still stupid, though. The drone is boring and dysfunctional. The only puzzle in this game, if you can call it that, is so lame. The fact that the majority of the runtime, aside from waiting, is collecting eggs is goofy, and the length of the game on its own is enough to be embarrassing. And this big fucking ball pit isn't even a ball pit. We don't talk about this thing enough, given how integral it is to the whole fucking franchise. This shit is so unbelievably inexcusable. There isn't much of a point in harping on this one. I have had a lot of fun with Banban 1 because I enjoyed coming up with arbitrary and ridiculous ways to keep replaying it, but it is absolutely one of the worst games this community has ever seen.
Hey there, sir. Do you have games on your phone?
I didn't think I'd rank the spin-off Garten of Banban Punch Rush this low, but it's only slightly less nothing than Banban 1, and it's arguably even less functional. Garten of Banban Punch Rush is just a game where you play as a Banban character and repeatedly slam your body into random objects. It's not that egregiously terrible, it's not that much worse than most arcade-style mobile games, but here's the thing, this game just doesn't work all that great. This game has a habit of both objects and missions not loading in efficiently enough. Sometimes your targeted object doesn't change for a very long time, leaving the player disoriented when having to change their focus drastically and within the time limit, and sometimes the actual objects in the room just take a long time to load in. I and other people have also experienced the game failing to spawn in enough of the required object, guaranteeing a loss, though I haven't seen or heard of that happening since launch day, so maybe that's not a problem anymore. But ultimately, this game isn't terrible for a mobile game, but unfortunately for this game, we have to judge it as a game, not just a mobile game, and it's really boring, and I do not like it whatsoever.
3 birds with 1 stone.
Man, I love Garten of Banban 2. Do you know this is the Banban game I have the most hours in, and I've played it for longer than Steam says I have because I downpatched it for speedrunning? I love this game. But just like with Banban 1, man, this game is so terrible. This is another game that I just created ways to enjoy it, but holy shit, this game blows. Hilariously, this game peaks in the first half. I actually think this first puzzle is totally fine. I think the nab-nab sequence is totally fine, and okay, that's where it ends, so maybe the first fifth of the game. But even after those first 2 small segments, the first real drone puzzle and the Captain Fiddle sequence aren't too terrible. And overall, that first big chunk of the game is at least enough to make it better than Banban 1 to me. But this game is still just really bland and boring, with a few sequences that stand out as being especially bad. There's a lot of just walking from one plain room to another plain room, and of course the infamous collect a series of blank puzzles. There's also just a lot of waiting around, like there is in most Banban games. But ultimately what makes this game so terrible is there's like 4 terrible sequences that appear almost back to back. There's the school sequence with Banbalina, where it's a series of quizzes with the most arbitrary answers possible, making the game borderline unfair. You have to go through 3 different quizzes, all with stupid answer options, and if you get it wrong, you need to go back to the start of the quiz, unable to skip any of the dialogue. Then that leads into the short part with the baby birds and the red light green light game with Slow Celine, which are both just whatever, but that leads into the cannon sequence, which is so bafflingly terrible and long that it hurts. It lasts so long. This then leads to a shitty Roblox obby, which is already terrible, but Banban feels so floaty that platforming in it is always frustrating. This then leads into the chase sequence, which isn't the worst thing ever, but the environment is literally just a series of bright red walls, which makes the sequence so flavorless. There are just so many bad sequences in this game. However, it has more qualities than Banban 1, so that's what keeps it above it. And Banban 6's sequences are even more consistently bad, and they last so much longer. But yeah, Garten of Banban 2, despite having a couple moments that are just average or passable, is a long series of frustrating and dull moments. The voice acting is goated though.
And it's all thanks to you.
We have entered our top 3 of the series, so we are officially at a point where the games are above a 1 out of 10. So that's something, I guess. Garten of Banban 4 is far from the worst game I have ever played, but man is it fucking boring. Banban 4 is the most story-focused game in the series, which is not inherently a problem, but the problem comes from the fact that the story is pretty boring, and the presentation of the story is even more boring. The great majority of this game's runtime consists of waiting around while other characters talk, that and backtracking. Now, credit where credit is due, the voice actors that debut in this game are generally good to great, but the dialogue is still uninteresting, and when the characters don't even have animations, it gets so boring waiting around for them to finish talking. And it's not just that the story is boring, the dialogue in this game is mostly pointless. A lot of the dialogue is Queen Bouncelia and Sheriff Toadster talking to you or each other, and quite a bit of it is about the kingdom and those characters. But the queen fucking dies at the end and is never heard from again, and the intricacies of this kingdom are both unimportant and hardly explored, so there wasn't even much of a reason for the game to be story-focused. The characters also talk very slowly, which makes it even more excruciating. With that being said, this game is pretty decent compared to what we've talked about thus far. This little sequence with Nab where you use the bird to detect which path to go through gets too much flack in my opinion. It's a little too long, and it's not the most fun, but it's a solid idea, it creates tension. The chase with Banban where he's chasing Nab is pretty cute, the platforming isn't as frustrating as usual, and it's a rare moment where the characters are actually somewhat charming. And the Spot the Difference game is genuinely really good. It's essentially a 3D version of I'm on observation duty, or akin to a game like the Exit 8 or False Dream. It works really well, and it's pretty fun, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. However, an inexcusable sequence is the boss fight. Every Banban boss fight tends to suck, but I do think the Kittysaurus fight takes the cake for the worst. For one, this fight has no instructions. I was able to figure out what to do and how it worked pretty quickly, but in no way are the mechanics or goal explained. Secondly, Kittysaurus' hitbox is very unreasonable, and she can just pull you in from an unreasonable distance. Thirdly, wow is this fight boring. The mechanics are so bare bones and there's so little to it, and the fact that it's in this big ass open room with no detail does not help. Aside from the sequences I named, the rest is just waiting and walking. So much of the game is waiting around and listening to dialogue, and watching bad cutscenes, and walking from one point to another. To give you an idea of how boring this game is, let me tell you a series of events. So, you do the Nab sequence to get the first gear, and like I said, I think this part is fine. Then you walk back to the transportation system slowly takes you to the main area, you walk to the very end of the main area to place the gear, then you listen to Queen Bouncelia ramble for an unnecessarily long time, then you listen to Banban ramble, then you listen to Stinger Flynn ramble, then Stinger Flynn puts you through a drug sequence, and then finally, you can move on to the next actual sequence. This sequence being very short and immediately goes back into backtracking. And what I just explained is only the very middle of the game. This game is so fucking slow. The general structure and quality of this one is a step up from certain others, but it is so egregiously boring that it does suck. Oh, and Choo Choo Charles is in the game! Garten of Banban 3 was such a significant step up from the first two, and it is still baffling how the following two couldn't live up to it. It's definitely not a good game, but it is much closer to passable. The problem with the game mostly comes down to the fact that it still gets very boring. There are still tasks that purely consist of collecting of a bunch of a thing. There's so much dialogue that interferes with the flow of the game. There are plenty of moments that are just waiting for something to happen. There are cutscenes that overstay their welcome. And the transportation system takes a very impressive 30 full seconds to take you anywhere every single time. This game really pisses me off with how many what should be brief moments are extended to be unnecessarily long in the hopes of making the game over 2 hours, which it does not come close to being. They even brought back the fucking canon game. But ultimately what makes this game so much better than the majority of the others in the series is that it genuinely has some solid sequences, some of which are pretty fun and clever. The Nabnalina sequence is actually a pretty well done idea. For those that don't recall, you need to manage 3 different obstacles in the room while performing Nabnalina's procedure. If a button on the wall lights up, you need to hit it with the drone. If the bars in the corner are anything but green, you need to make them all green. And the main goal is to inject Nabnalina with the correct color combination that you mix together. It's decently fun having to juggle the mechanics, and it's a solid idea. The Jumbo Josh sequence is one of the most interesting ideas this series has executed in my opinion, and it's something I would have liked to see more of. You need to solve some basic puzzles based around obtaining these blocks in order to progress, but every now and then Jumbo Josh will appear, and if the room isn't exactly how it was at the start, you lose. I like this idea. It's cute. It does a decent job at creating tension because you will stress over making sure everything is as it should be, and it's decently fun to play. The boss fight in this game is still iffy. Unfortunately, the Euphoric brothers have just never made a truly good boss fight, but this one is easily their best. Although the design is pretty horrific, having the boss be a character with 2 heads, each of which have different attacks, is pretty smart. The main problem with the boss is that one of the creature's heads shoots out these big water balloons at you, and they have a really stupid hitbox and also bounce all over the place. It's also not entirely clear what you're supposed to do on a first playthrough, because the instruction is just a bad drawing which looks like a dinosaur suckling on a penis, but this is the most fun boss fight the series has to offer. It's also worth acknowledging that although there is still so much filler in this game, there's also more entertainment value than the others. I could do without the majority of the dialogue and cutscenes, but the scene of being in a car with the gang while rocket music plays is truly a moment I will never forget, and Banban's lust for the taste of pancreases is at least mildly entertaining. This series does not have the best characters, but there are moments where they can be charming, and I think Banban 3 has some of the best of that. Garten of Banban 3 is a series of boring waiting times and a few genuinely good sequences. It has its entertaining moments, and there are some gameplay ideas in here I wish were fleshed out more and utilized more, but it is still a boring and irritating game. It could be way worse, but it could be way better.
I can't be seen talking to you.
We have finally made it to the end with the latest game, Garten of Banban 7. I think this game is totally fine. It is not good, some old habits die real hard, but this game is such a major improvement, and I really hope we see this series continue in this direction and continue to improve. This game has a shockingly well done and cohesive aesthetic. For a series that's always been made up of a bunch of random assets that don't even make sense to be alongside each other, this game is actually really pretty. The city that essentially acts as the hub area of the game actually feels lived in. It feels like a real home to the roaming Javanium creatures, where the overall city is arguably in distress, but it's still cozy to them in some places, like the cafe or the theater. This place really does feel like it's inhabited, and that makes it strangely comforting in between all the craziness. And it's worth taking into account how much a cohesive aesthetic or visual quality can enhance a game's quality. A lot, and I mean a lot of games that people in this community love, are functionally unspeakably boring, purely from a gameplay perspective, but that's simply not the only element of design we look for when we play a game. Banban 7 is very far from outstanding visually, which is why it still ain't great, but the effort put into making the game's aesthetic cohesive is enough for the game to be leagues better than the others. The game is also less boring than all of the others. That's not to say it isn't boring, and we'll get into that, but it's definitely less boring. The hospital sequence the game essentially starts with is a decent little puzzle, the bitter giggle chase sequence is surprisingly solid, and I really love the goddamn Banbalina puzzle. Now, I basically only love it because I'm a Banban professional and I can and could solve it without the hints in the room, but that doesn't change the fact that I love seeing how fast I can solve this puzzle. The Javanium baby sequence has also grown on me. It's clunky, and it's a pretty blatant copy of the Resident Evil 8 baby, but I don't know, I think it's a respectable attempt at horror. With those nice things being said, this game is still pretty mediocre. This game still gets pretty boring, because like I said, old habits die hard. The two main bad habits being unnecessary dialogue and a lack of real gameplay. There is still too much dialogue that serves no real purpose. At the very start of the game, Syringan talks for way too long to remain engaged, and that is terrible to have at the beginning. In fact, the very, very start of the game is an instructional video designed for employees that serves literally zero purpose. It technically explains a mechanic that applies to the following section. It warns you that Nabnalina can kill you from above, but you can figure this out yourself. It only applies to this 1 minute long part of the game, and the video is borderline longer than it takes to finish this section of the game. And yeah, there still just isn't much gameplay. Again, the environment being nice makes the game significantly less miserable to play, but it's still very much a walking sim with very few mechanics. It's a lot of walking around, interacting with characters, a great majority of which are YouTubers, and it has some of the typical Banban content like collect a lot of one thing, or collect this one thing to go collect another thing to progress. It's not the most fun game. In fact, Banban 3 is probably a more fun game. I would say it has more good sequences, but Banban 7 just being so nice aesthetically is a big pickup for me. But easily my least favorite part of this game, and this will give you a sense of deja vu, is the drone. I wanted the drone to be better so bad, but it just isn't. In the olden days of Banban, like 7-ish months ago, to move the drone you would just click in a direction and it would fly there. But we get an upgrade for the drone in Banban 7, which makes it where you can look through the point of view of the drone and move it manually. This is a great idea, and it's something that fan games and parodies have done effectively. If only it could have been done effectively in the officially licensed video game. This thing controls terribly and is beyond frustrating to use. It also breaks a lot. Like a lot. I hate this thing. All in all, Garten of Banban 7 is totally fine. It's strangely charming, it feels weirdly comforting, it has some pretty solid content, and it definitely looks like the developers tried. It's still not a good game, because it is still boring and irritating to play in full, but I cannot stress how much better this one is than the rest. And even outside of the Banban series, whereas the rest of them I'm basically just judging as Banban games, it's actually pretty distinctly mid, and not much worse than a lot of games in the genre. In conclusion, Garten of Banban is a series I've dedicated far too much of my life to. If you add up my total playtime of all the games on Steam, it's 170 hours, which is about an entire week, and that is not including an additional 10 to 20 hours that I played certain games on a down-patched version, and it also doesn't include all the time I spent on the mobile game, which has to be somewhere in the 5-hour range. I don't think anyone is more qualified to do this very video than I am. I didn't even get into the different bugs in these games, or the speedruns, or the patches and different versions, or the fact that I have every single unlockable character in the mobile game. I could spend so much more time talking about this series, and I will going forward because this is my job. I do think this series is objectively terrible, and that was really the only thing I felt about it for over a year, but these days I am feeling a little softer towards it after seeing actual effort in improving. I spoke about this in my original video about the game, but Garten of Banban 7 was legitimately a significant moment in the evolution of the series, and the developers as well. It is easily their best work to date, but it also features Yeah, who, despite being basically the least controversial or harsh content creator to cover the series, is the content creator that the Euphoric brothers have had the most drama with. Mostly due to the fact that Yeah's Bird Up meme was a big part of what made Banban popular in the early days, despite him and the rest of us disliking the game. But the two have made amends, and he has his own cameo in the latest game. They've also unblocked all of their greatest criticizers in an attempt to be more open-minded. Something unrelated that is also cool and somewhat worth mentioning is that the developers are working on a new game that has nothing to do with Banban, called Unplagued. It doesn't look great by any means, but it's a multiplayer game that does seem fairly interesting, and the footage we have is likely early in development. I'm intrigued to see where this one goes. The Euphoric brothers have had a series of controversies in their short time in the limelight, and I and most people are of the opinion that most of their catalog of games is quite terrible, but ultimately we have seen some major changes in recent time, and it would be purely biased to disregard that. I hope Garten of Banban 7 is the start of a pattern, and that this series starts consistently getting better, because Garten of Banban is going nowhere. The developers have no reason to stop making them. Even if the series has decreased in popularity, or if it continues to do so, it will likely always be profitable for a very, very long time. As well as that, even if I don't like it, or if most people don't, there are people that love these games and have grown attached to the IP. I don't want it to go anywhere, if just for those people. But I do think those fans, and the people that pay for these games, deserve a certain level of quality for the price tag. And Banban 7 is a really great step up, but we need to keep that going. That's all I'm hoping for. That's all I have for this video. That's my ranking of the games and how I feel about them. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like and subscribe to support the channel, and follow myself and the others that took part in making this video possible. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye for now.